Sounds like okay, Jean-François, I guess we can.
It's done.
So you tell me when I go ahead.
It is on.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, here in Nairobi. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen who are connecting with us remotely from around the world. Welcome to the opening press conference for the fourth meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is David Ainsworth. I'm Head of Communications for the United Nations Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. In our press conference today, we have the honor of hearing from the Executive Secretary of the Convention, Ms. Elizabeth Maruma and Mrema. We also have with us today the co-chairs who've been with us throughout this process for the negotiations of this framework, Basil Nanhaba of Canada and Francis Ogwal of Uganda. In today's press conference, we'll have some very brief remarks from all of our panelists, and then we will turn to questions. Now, we will take questions both here in Nairobi as well as questions from online. So those of you who are online following us on YouTube, you can enter your questions into the chat feature and we'll pick them up. When you enter your questions online, please do give your name and the name of your media organization. We won't be answering the questions unless we actually know who's put them on. So, without further ado, let us begin this conference with a few brief remarks from Executive Secretary Elizabeth Mrema. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for all the different media who have been able to join us. And here in Nairobi in 2019, the world governments actually held their first meeting of the working group to negotiate the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Their tireless determination, passion, and commitment kept these discussions going over the last 2 years, both online and in person. We've passed through Rome, through online meetings, and lastly, through Geneva, to arrive again at the soil of Kenya here in Africa and here in Nairobi, where humanity first emerged from nature. With this fourth meeting of the working group, we are building momentum for our journey towards the second part of the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. There are signs of this momentum. The world has undertaken new action and inspired new partnerships at the highest level of government, business, and civil society, as well as all other stakeholders. The profile of biodiversity has been raised in the international arena with increased political attention for biodiversity in major international fora. For instance, the G7, the G20, the United Nations Environment Assembly, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and many others. Public calls for action to safeguard nature led by the world's youth grow stronger by day, and as unfortunately nature continues to decline at unprecedented rates, and the impacts of biodiversity loss truly hits us home. There is now a solid foundation for the negotiations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework here in Nairobi. But much remains to be done to deliver an agreement that can bend the curve of biodiversity loss, can contribute to the achievements of the Decade for Action for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and facilitate or contribute to the achievements of the 2050 vision of the Convention. This week is the last meeting before the second part of the 15th Conference of the Parties, and the last chance to also shape not only the framework, but also many other moving parts that will interact with the framework and help us achieve our goals with urgency as 2030 draws even closer on the horizon. Parties are looking amid the continuing threats of a global, including natural and man-made disasters, but I'm certain that together the parties and stakeholders can demonstrate once again the power of international cooperation and multilateralism. As I said in the plenary this morning, we all do better when we work together. Our differences do matter, but our common humanity matters more. Let me close my remarks here with a mention of an important announcement that every person had been patiently waiting for months, and probably particularly the media. Acknowledging the urgency to address the biodiversity crisis, adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and launch its implementation, the co-presidents, the government of China, and the Bureau have emphasized that the second part of the Conference of the Parties must be held this year in 2022. Due to the continued uncertainties related to the ongoing pandemic situation in China, China as the co-president, with the support of the Bureau, has decided to relocate the second part of the meetings. After a series of consultations among the government of China as the co-president, the Bureau, the Secretariat, and the government of Canada as the host of the Secretariat, it has been decided that the second part of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity will take place at the seat of the Secretariat, that is in Montreal, Canada, from 5th to 17th December 2022. I take this opportunity to sincerely thank the government of China for its flexibility, strong support, leadership, and commitment during these challenging and critical times. I would also like to thank the government of Canada, the host of the Secretariat, for its readiness to speedily step up or step in and provide the location for the meetings. The Secretariat will continue to work closely in the coming days, weeks, and months with the co-presidents and the government of Canada to ensure that preparations are fully in place for a successful 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties and the concurrent meetings of the parties to the convention protocols in December 2022. So I stand ready to take any questions related to our week here. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Elizabeth. I'll open the floor now to Basil van Havre, who will provide some brief remarks to both of you.
Good day to all of you. It's a pleasure to be back and to be speaking to you. Let me explain a little bit what we're going to be doing this week, and starting by context on what happened in Geneva. So in Geneva, we started from a text that Francis and I wrote a while back, and a very important step in the process was transferring the ownership of that text to the parties. In the process, and that is a normal step in any negotiation, everybody added a number of elements, and that made for a relatively unwieldy and complex text. But that is okay. The principal point was to make that transfer of the ownership. What we're going to be doing over the next 6 days is to streamline that text and turn it into something that anybody can understand. Undoubtedly, there will remain some area that will need to be negotiated when we get together in Montreal in December. But our aim is to remove and work with the party to remove the vast majority of what we call those brackets. We will work essentially through contact group and what we call smaller event group we call friend of the chair. So small group of delegates will get together and will work over individual elements of the text. And then we'll bring all that together in plenaries toward the end of the week. So that's the dynamic. We have urged everybody to work ready to make compromise and to work on solution. Now is not the time anymore to put a new element on the table. That has been done over the last 3 years. Now is the time to boil all that down into this essential oil that will be brought to the ministers when they get together in Montreal. Francis, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Taking on from what Basil has said, I just want to emphasize the point here that when you hear about post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, that word biodiversity framework, you may tend to think it is only biasing itself to biodiversity, but actually the framework itself is beyond biodiversity. There are issues concerning pollution, there are issues concerning climate change, there are issues concerning land degradation, there's linking biodiversity to the achievement of SDGs, there is linking it to other multilateral environmental agreements that relates to the biodiversity convention. So this is just not a framework of biodiversity alone, as you hear it, it goes beyond. And so even the name post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework for now is a placeholder, maybe to remain with that name, maybe to change the name after COP, but for now, to give it something that we can use for calling it, that is the way it is being called now. If it remains like that, that is it. But if it changes the name, don't be surprised about that. And so you will see that the goals and the targets in draft one that the parties are now discussing here cuts across all these things I've been pointing at. I think we will mainly wait to hear your views or questions so that we can respond to them. Thank you.
Great, thank you very, very much. So after that brief time, I'm going to open the floor for questions. We'll start with questions here in Nairobi. I see a question here, the third row, beside the gentleman in the black jacket. We'll take his question. Please introduce yourself to the panelists and indicate to whom you would address your question.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Naftali Mora is my name. I'm a Kenyan journalist, but working for the Shima Music Agency, that's Kenyan State Media. I want to shoot my question to Dr. Mrema. Of course, we have interviewed you virtually very many times in Mrema. I just want to request you to paint a picture of the state of biodiversity globally, and especially here in Africa. Is it a doomsday scenario or is it an optimistic scenario? Then, on Sunday, when this working group, open-ended working group concludes its negotiations and debate and all that, what milestone should we be looking forward to?
Excellent, thank you for your question. Executive Secretary.
Thank you very much. Very good question. The state of biodiversity globally, in which case Africa is not an exception, is not good at all. You will recall the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBS, in their report of May 2019, clearly indicated biodiversity loss is at an unprecedented rate in the history of humankind. Over 1 million species are feared going to extinct within this century. Over three-quarters of the land is degraded. 85% of wetlands are degraded. 66% of the ocean is polluted. So all these figures, one will say, are scary. However, another report from the economic aspect of biodiversity by the World Economic Forum 2020 clearly indicated 50% of the global GDP is moderately or highly dependent on biodiversity or nature. 395 million jobs could be accrued from nature or biodiversity. $10.1 trillion will accrue from biodiversity nature by 2030. So clearly, with those dependencies, there are risks, there are impacts, and yet opportunities for the economies of many countries. Coming home here in Kenya, we all know the importance of biodiversity for tourism. And the big percentage of Kenya's economy is dependent on tourism. So when we talk of the loss of biodiversity at an unprecedented rate, what will that mean to the economy of Kenya and probably many countries also in Africa? We are also sitting here covering our faces because we are still in or recovering from the COVID pandemic. And we know the cause of the pandemic is our human activities on biodiversity, which have interfered into the animal kingdom, or as the result of expansion of agricultural lands or agricultural production livestock, We have continued to deforest the forest and therefore going into closer to animals and ended up with viruses which are not harmful to animals but harmful to human beings and transmitted to human beings. And as a result of trade, tourism, transportation, we all found ourselves locked down for over 2 years. So again, clearly indicates the importance of biodiversity, and if we are not careful, we have all seen the impacts. And that's why we are saying biodiversity, despite the gloomy picture, is still a foundation of life. Without it, there will be no food, there will be no water, there will be no clean air we are breathing, and there will be no that ecosystem that stores carbon. Thank you. In terms of the milestones, I think that's a good question for the co-chairs.
So let's take your term of milestone in a general term. You know, in the negotiation here, it's been becoming a bit of a loaded subject. So the concept is, where do we want to be at the end of 10 years on our way to what we've expressed in the vision in 2050? And in fact, when we started this process, when we started with the first draft, there was clearly a need to express that vision in terms that could be measured. So we said, yes, live in harmony with nature in 2050, everybody's happy. When you start to break that down in terms of what it actually means and how we're going to be measuring that we're there, that is very important. And further, you want to know whether the action you have taken up to 2030 makes a difference. So protecting, you heard a lot about protecting 30% of our land and sea by 2030. That's something that is discussed here. What we want to know, beyond the fact that we would have done that, or whatever other metrics we would decide, is, does that change anything in terms of the status of ecosystem and species? Does that change anything in terms of how nature meets people need? So we need both a definition of what success is in 2050, but we also need a way to say that we're moving forward and we're making progress that enable us to adjust action. Perhaps the decision that are relevant today and will be relevant up to 2030 will be different than the one that will be relevant in the following decade. So having a strong system that enables us not only to know that we're doing the things we wanted to do, but also whether those actions are making a change in the environment is very important.
Yeah, so I think Coach has elaborately explained to you our ideas of the milestone within the framework itself. But perhaps to the journalists, if your milestone was meaning what are we taking out of here from this meeting, the main thing from here in this meeting is actually for us to come with a clean text. You saw the co-chair explain that we've had the text from Geneva that is full of square brackets, and it's going to take a lot of energy from delegates to really narrow it down to a few sentences or one or two lines that could make sense. So we want, if we cannot get clean text, remain with very few text, where we can't avoid, where parties think they have failed completely to reach some level of agreement. And that is the text that is going to go to COP15 for consideration and final adoption. So the framework from here should be in a better shape when we leave here. That is our overall expectation. So it has already started. They are now in contact with workers with here. The opening session has ended, and we can work.
If I can add just one quickly, one element. Beside what, on top or in addition to what Francis said, there is two things. There is the actual text, is it in better shape? And how do we leave that community of negotiators? Are they trusting each other? Do we have the good climate to make the compromise? So all those aspects are also important to us. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll take a question from online next. We'll come back to the room afterwards. So we have Gloria Dickey from Reuters, who's asking us, and she's following up on the spirit about the two meetings. She says, Negotiators were unable to make sufficient progress in Geneva, and so she's asking the panelists, why do you expect this round of discussions to go differently? So,
Maybe I can start. Maybe I'll start and Francis will add to it. Actually, our assessment of Geneva is slightly different. Those contact groups that had more modest mandates were able to go a lot further. And if you look at the targets, especially I'm thinking about contact group 3 that look at target 9 to 13, that text is pretty clean. So it is a matter of time. That tells us that when you give time to the negotiator, they can get to the clean text we want. So what we're having here is the right condition to bring all the text to that same level of maturity, I would say. That is.
Yes, the other, we've been, actually before coming here, we tried to put our heads together and see how do we really make progress as fast as we can. Because you see, 6 days is not much. Today already, day 1 seems to be coming to an end. But what we have also advised delegates to do while here is that for the texts that were fully negotiated in Geneva, they should not add any more text into those ones. Rather, they begin to narrow down the text. So we don't expect parties again to say, you know, we forgot to add restoration here, we forgot to add conservation here. We said no. For those that we agreed in Geneva were fully negotiated, focus on narrowing it down. Then here, we have begun with those that we didn't get time to negotiate on them. And then we shall go to those that were partially negotiated. And then we see whether now we can look at this as a whole and make much more progress. So that is the way so far the thinking is, and hopefully it can help us make some progress. But of course, discussion in situations like this is fluid. You don't know how it will flow, but our hope is parties now have known the date for COP is clear. They know what is now before them. There's no room for thinking there's another meeting, there is this. This is the final for this working group.
okay, thank you very much. We had a question in the room from the back there. Someone had their hand raised. Great, thank you.
Hi, this is Aruna Chandrasekhar from Carbon Brief. I think the other journalists sort of preempted this, and Marcel, I think you also said it, but the term milestones seems to have cropped up in terms of some amount of disagreement on perhaps on day 1 with things of whether it is included in the text or whether this is cropped up in terms of co-leads suggesting it. Why this disagreement on milestones particularly? And I mean, how good is an agreement without milestones to track progress? I think that's one question. The other question is many countries have not, at least some countries that I know of have not even sent delegates. What would be a message that you would want to put forth to governments who and how seriously they take biodiversity versus showing up in Montreal to sit with this text? Yeah.
First, I'll take your last point first. I don't have the statistic in front of me, and I don't know if Elizabeth has them. But it is the highest level of participation ever in a meeting. So yes, there may be that some governments were not able to travel. You have to realize that for small countries, they're sending small delegation here. If somebody tests positive to COVID on the day of departure, you lose half of the delegation, or you may be losing the whole delegation. So we have steps and measures in place to allow people to participate remotely if there are extenuating circumstances. I am not aware of countries that willingly have not been sending, maybe, I'm not sure about the whole EC, but many, the vast majority of countries have been sending delegation. We have more people, I think more, Elizabeth will correct me, but I think you're more funded delegated here than ever before. So that part is I'm pretty confident that we have the people here. And those that cannot, there is many circumstances where people could not be The second point about where on the formal negotiation, the notion of how we're going to be measuring progress, clearly this new framework will have a much more robust planning, reporting, and review system. And that is, I think, what we call transparency and accountability or responsibility. I think there is a need to be able to explain to political leaders and population what we're doing and how those massive investments will be going. We see in the design of this system, there is kind of the very natural type of negotiation that take place in terms of how you organize various pieces. And delegates come here with their best expert advice, and then we'll have to have those discussions. Those discussions will be taking place in the contact group that is actually meeting as we speak. So for me, it's part of the natural process of negotiation. Not everybody is on the same page. That's why we have those processes. The important point is at the end of the week to be on the same page.
Yeah, just a little bit there. So in addition to what you are saying there, the issue of milestones. Again, to get back to you on it, from what you have said. Furthermore, yes, that parties thought that it was adding too much layer, that the framework was looking so difficult to understand. And we are saying this framework, since it's a framework for all, you don't need to write it for me, the expert, or a few people to understand it. Then it will people just put it aside. So they've said they want to see how to integrate those milestones and into the goals or targets. And so the already proposal is there on how to proceed with that. So I think the milestone is not completely going to disappear. These are now parties going to really put their brain and see where they could put certain elements of the milestone, under which goal, under which target, and in what kind of language would it be. Because good ideas came, and we thought initially that the milestones were good to measure the 2050 goals, because the 2050 goals are outcome oriented. But now, with that understanding that is making it too complex, let's try to see how it can be simplified. So that is the way forward on milestone. There is possibility of integration. Yeah.
Okay, we'll turn back to a question online. We received a question from Ivan Semeniuk, who's with the Globe and Mail in Canada. And Ivan's question is about COP15. He says, after 2 years of waiting, can you explain why it was decided that the meeting must, and he writes must in capital letters, occur this year? What makes this climate timing so crucial? And then he also asks as well, how large is the meeting expected to be in terms of attendees? And then also the question of how difficult was it to shift location at this stage?
Thank you very much. In terms of why the conference of the party has to happen this year, a simple reason is our COP has been postponed, I think, 4 times. And at the same time, this year, other big meetings are taking place. UN Environment Assembly has taken place, WTO has taken place and took landmark decisions. Convention to combat desertification took place last May, Abidjan. Stockholm +50 took place in Stockholm, Sweden recently. Climate change is due to take place in November. We could not be left behind, one. When we know the future, one says no one should be left behind. But two, as I responded to the earlier question, biodiversity does not also wait. If we are talking of biodiversity loss at unprecedented rate, species are going into extinction. Do we want them to completely disappear? So clearly, we see the reason why the Bureau insisted that the conference of the party has to take place. Why, of course, we will not have relocated the venue if the situation was conducive to be able to announce the COP dates to go to China. And because we all know the pandemic situation is an uncertain situation, when we were all locked down 2 years ago, I don't think anybody ever thought that we would have even been indoors for 6 months. but 1 year ended, the second ended, and almost the third, we're halfway or so. So likewise, if we were to continue to wait, it means then the COP will not have taken this this year. The question is, how long will we have waited to say, now let us give up, to be able to prepare for the COP? And we all know to prepare for a conference of the parties is not the way we'll prepare a virtual meeting. It needs time, and even the 6 months time now we have is not adequate. It needs resources, and not $5 million resources, triple of that or more. So all these had to be taken into account. And we should also know, for all international agreements with specific offices or secretariat, there is always a provision in the agreement or convention that all meetings should take place at the seat of the secretariat unless there is a member, a party to that treaty, offers to hold it elsewhere. And even when that happens, it means that offering government is also obliged to cover the cost, all additional cost, which will be accrued as the result of moving that meeting from the seat of that secretariat to its country. So in this regard, when it became clear that we cannot wait for the situation in China to improve to a state where dates could be announced for this year, then the default will be where? We go back to where the seat of the secretariat is, where all meetings ought to be taking place. But of course, being a big meeting like the Conference of the Parties, the secretariat could not just decide, yes, let the COP be in Montreal. Because we can only do that if the number of delegates will fit in our offices. There then we have control. And our offices, our meeting room is hardly 50 people. So anything beyond, then we also have to consult our host to be able to help us to provide the venue that will be adequate for the number of delegates who may attend the Conference of the Parties. And this is where then we had to make sure then we involve our host government and also get their agreement in terms of being able to assure us and all the participants that yes, there will be a meeting venue, yes, all arrangements will be put in place for a successful COP. How many we will have for now is only speculation. Normally, when we have our normal biannual conferences of the parties, we normally meet every 2 years, except this during period of COVID, where now it's 4 years we have not met. We normally look at 5,000, 6,000 delegates during COP. But the next COP is expected to be double, if not triple, because such a big meeting was also 12 years ago, or if we had met 2020, 10 years ago, when the Aichi Biodiversity targets were met. Now the Aichi Biodiversity targets will be replaced by the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework going to be negotiated here this week. So literally this will be at the scale of the 2010 Aichi, the COP, which then was held in Japan. So if normally we have 5,000, 6,000, then it means we are looking probably at the range of 8, 9, 10, around that, in terms of planning purposes. I hope I've responded on the question.
Thanks very much. We can take another question from here in Nairobi.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Ibrahim, investigative journalist based in Dhaka, Bangladesh. I'm here as a journalism network fellow. And so my question is based about Bangladesh. You know, there are 21 target for global biodiversity conversion. So how many target has Bangladesh successfully met? That's my first question. And second question is that, you know, to complete the post-2020 targets, so what should Bangladesh do? What's your suggestion for Bangladesh, you know, especially the Sundarban over there, the largest mangrove forest, to conserve the biodiversity in Sundarban? What is your suggestion and what is the challenges of Bangladesh to complete this target? Thank you.
Perhaps I'll start from a relatively global way to answer your question, and we'll see how far we go down to the issue. The targets in the HE system were largely not spent, and that is a problem. And we've done quite a bit of thinking in terms of diagnostic why that happened. Obviously, there have been competing priorities and challenges in allocation of resource. But it's interesting to dig a little bit deeper and see that, for example, the 17 and 10% targets were largely met because they were measurable, they were simple. Politicians could readily understand and say, okay, I have 4 years in front of me. Can I be announcing 17% by the end of the 4 years? And then turning to people like me and say, make it happen. So lesson one, we need measurable targets. Lesson two, we need targets that are reachable. They need to be ambitious but realistic targets. There was a lot of aspirational targets in the HE system, which are really good to stretch people, but present a communication challenge because you never get there. So we're trying to change that. We're trying to have ambitious targets that get us to where we want, but targets that people can actually accomplish with efforts, with lots of resource, blood, sweat, and tears, but things that are doable. Your second point is around how does country organize themselves with that. There is what we call a National Biodiversity Action Plan. You will hear about the acronym NBSAPs. And that's a fundamental part of the planning for action at the country level. That's where a country, perhaps like Francis is coming from Uganda, which is landlocked, obviously marine targets are less relevant at the national level. So those plans need to be adapted to national circumstances, yet they need to reflect the system as a whole. And then they need to address the various performance indicators. So we are where we are. I'm not going to be able to speak to the specific location you have. I apologize, and I'll do some reading tonight about that. But I can tell you that mangrove conservation in general is a very important tool. It's a very important tool for conservation because many species, as you know, depend on the ecosystem. But it's also a very important tool for people. Mangrove are protection from severe weather events. They are the filter for water. So you can see that protection, conservation, and restoration of a particular ecosystem like mangrove play a very important role in the long-term viability of ecosystem.
Yes, so when this global framework is adopted, like you heard from the co-chair, each country, including Bangladesh, will have to review those NBSAPs and see targets or goals in the framework and how it suits their national circumstances. So when it comes time for us to look at what they've done, they report on the national targets that has been aligned to the global one. So that is basically the way it is. And so maybe when one looks at the Bangladesh report, like you were saying, one should be able to see whether first they had aligned their national targets for biodiversity to the strategic plan for biodiversity from 2020. Then how much do they report in terms of those targets? But there are certain things that are cross-cutting in this implementation of this framework or even the targets. One of it is lack of financial resources at the national level, even for most of the time global level. So this framework is going to be as good as if resources will be there to support its implementation. So countries may even prioritize to do 1, 2, 3, but if they don't have the resources, then you expect it to remain largely a paper thing. Secondly, national governments also need to really prioritize biodiversity as a key area that resources should go to. Maybe for most time people think nature is just going to keep taking care of itself, you don't put money there, it replenishes, yet there is massive degradation going on. So without that commitment at national level, things cannot really improve very fast. Before you get this global one, I think what envelope is going on. Ever small, like I said the other day, ever small it is. So those are some of the things that we need to be looking at, and you, the press people, need to help us raise the profile of biodiversity to climate change. Because everybody seems to be talking about climate change, but there are certain scenarios where loss of biodiversity is escalating climate change impacts. If you go down and cut or destroy a forest and destroy, then you say, all we are seeing now is too much flooding and landslide because of climate change. But suppose that landslide, that hill area was not, the trees were not cut and it was raining, how much of the landslide would have occurred with that area well vegetated, with the way it was? So sometimes that is how we are doing things, and everybody starts flying climate change. That distant, when not climate change, everybody is saying it is a global thing. But what action are we doing at national level that can help us better adapt before climate, even so that even if climate change came, you have some way out of survival here and there. But you make situation so worse, climate change will definitely come and make it much, much worse, for human beings. So that we need to look at this too, and that's what we are saying, that intervention on climate change and biodiversity should not be delinked. You can't stop biodiversity now and say, first wait, we are coming back. We are on climate change. Surely, you are not going to save anything at the end of it.
Indeed, each country is unique, and when it comes to implementation,
Can you just fold down the laptop?
sorry?
Oh, yes, I see, right.
Each country is unique, and each country will have its own mechanism of implementation. What is already agreed is that the national strategies on biodiversity and action plans will continue to be the tool for implementation. And virtually over 185 countries during the last 12 years have already developed and updated their NBSAPs, or National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans. Of course, with the new post-2020, when adopted, countries may wish to look at those existing NBSAPs. They might need to be updated to also be able to determine national commitments, because what will be adopted is a global framework, which needs then to be translated into national targets, which then can be the basis of monitoring and reporting on its implementation. Of course, we will have listened to CEO of GF this morning, where he has already allocated over $33 million to already begin supporting countries to create that enabling environment for the implementation of the framework by the time it is adopted. So, and the idea is, one lesson we learned from the Aichi targets, for many countries, it took 3-4 years before implementation began, because countries began with the updating of the NBSAPs. We hope this time that can be avoided. And this is what the support from Jeff will enable countries to avoid that and go to implementation straight on. Because in any case, the framework is building upon and lessons learned from the Aichi Biodiversity target. So there are many targets which just need to continue to be implemented because they will still find themselves or they are finding already themselves in the draft framework. So this is the time for countries to begin preparing the groundwork to avoid any delay in the commencement of implementation of the framework when it is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take,
There's this person.
yes,
behind
there's
who
someone
you don't
behind
see.
the pillar, this gentleman over here, yes, please, take the microphone.
Hi, my name is Asad Zia and I'm working with the Express Tribune in Pakistan. And my question is about Pakistan. That Pakistan has a lot of issues in terms of environment, but we haven't seen any representative to attend this meeting. Can you please share that why they not send their delegation to attend this meeting? This is important. Thank you.
I think for now it's still early because as for the previous answer, I don't have the full statistics whether they are here or not and why not. But I know Pakistan has been active in the previous meeting. And we also acknowledge with apology that we have had many issues in terms of delaying the issuance or receipt of tickets, particularly for those countries which are supported by the Secretariat. So it could be that, and therefore they are still on the way, or other reasons. I will have to check the statistics. And in the event Pakistan has not attended, I don't think the Secretariat can respond because, as I said, each country is different, each country has its own priorities, and we may not know what challenges the country is facing that there's no delegate here. But of course, they are active parties in the biodiversity agenda. And we know Pakistan is being mentioned globally, especially on the campaign of tree planting. How many trees? Several billions commitment.
Good, thank you very much. We have two more questions. There's a question, maybe take the one, yes, right beside you there, and then we'll go across.
Good afternoon. My name is Murad Khan. I'm also from Pakistan. I'm a freelance journalist, and here I'm from EJ, Earth Journalism Network. My question is, there are wildfire incidents specifically in US, Australia, and also in Pakistan. And if I give a single example, in a single province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, there are more than 400 wildfire incidents in just 40 days. So, due to these incidents, a lot of biodiversity loss, a lot of trees have been lost, even human loss also. So, my question is, what kind of measures can be taken by CBD to prevent these issues in future?
I don't think the issue is not what measures CBD will take, but is what measures all of us will take. And one, for instance, you have mentioned wildfires. The climate community will associate the wildfires, earthquake, floods with climate change. But that's also a biodiversity issue. So this reminds us all that when it comes to biodiversity nature issues, we need to begin thinking away from the silos, because the solutions, you cannot deal with one issue against or without looking at other issues. And that's why the co-chair, Francis, at the beginning mentioned, when you look at the framework, it's not the framework for biodiversity alone. It responds to pollution, it responds to species, it responds to climate change, it responds to ocean, to water. All these issues are related. And what we are urging our parties, countries to think seriously at national level is to look at issues as a whole of government, whole of society approach, and not that this is the matter of Ministry of Agriculture or Fisheries alone, because in that way, then as you deal with one issue, it means you are creating impacts on another environmental issue. So we need to think in a holistic way as solutions to many of these issues. And this is one of the lessons we are all learning as we move from the last 50 years when the first environmental conference was held to date.
Yes, let me just add something to what the Secretary said. I think also sometimes the global community, even national level thinking on certain things take time to be accepted What am I meaning there? Climate change. You've heard in some places people saying, no, there's nothing like that. There's no climate change. Okay? They just say the hoax or whatever. Now, if you are putting situations like that, how should it be interpreted? Down, and most of these can be high caliber persons, you know, that, and whatever they say usually becomes so binding on people. So there are certain things when we are talking about it, we need one voice from our leaders, from everybody, so that it's taken seriously. But the moment we create another school of thought, no, those are alarmists, nothing like that is there, then you will get those who want to hear that statement and move with you. Then there are these ones who know you are not telling people the truth. So that is the other bit that makes life a little bit hard for us. And then something also related to that is that when you now want to take action as the CBD, we should be working together. You've said this a lot of time. We shouldn't be saying this is only a CBD intervention, because it involves so many of these parties together. You know, you're not going, wildfires could be destroying biodiversity, but how is it then starting? You could go to the causes of that wildfire and see how you try to handle so that you save biodiversity. So this is in addition to what the executive sector is saying. I want to bring that point that we need not to think very much in the opposite direction. Even today, you had the executive secretary and others will continue. There's a loss of species. There's a loss of ecosystem. But others are saying, surely, maybe they don't yet see. They don't yet see the impact. They're saying nobody seems to be feeling anything. And the world operates in such a way that when there is a crisis, then everyone starts scampering to be seen, to be rescuing the situation. Science started warning people. We are told about climate change in many years. It is here. Why has it arrived to where we are? And we are beginning to scamper now. So we are talking about loss of species, loss of ecosystems, its impact on health, but pandemics and so forth, people think it is just something said for the past. Eventually the whole thing catches up with us. So let's take some of these things as a warning that needs to be addressed now and not to be put aside.
Great, thank you. So we're getting near the end of the conference because we're running out of time. There's a question back there, and then we've got a question from Stella, but I do want to take one more from online as well. So we'll go from the back there. We'll have to keep the questions and the answers brief so we can get through them before the top of the hour. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me speak. Yeah, my question is from all the panelists. The co-chair mentioned something about the realistic milestones. We also discussed it yesterday. But one of the realistic things that we have in this world right now is development. And when we talk about development, there are issues, and mostly developing countries like India, Pakistan, and many other countries, they generally fight with this notion of development versus protection or conservation. In that context, how much is CBD focusing on that part that we have to develop, that there are many millions of people who might have to, reduce the diversity or increase the carbon footprint to reach a level where they can develop themselves? And also what Asad just said about the wildfires. So many of the things that we have in the world are natural. So wildfires are also natural, floods are also natural, and they somehow do destruct the biodiversity, but in the long time to come, they contribute, as we know. So have the CBD included those kind of things when they were finalizing the papers? Yeah. And also, if you could just comment upon how we have worked upon the numbers, like the 30 by 30 or 17% of freshwater land conservation. Like, what is the measure or what is the psych behind these numbers? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask the panelists. That's an extensive set of questions. Let's see if we can have the panelists address them succinctly.
Let me start. Economic development, absolutely. And that is not only an issue for developing countries, it's an issue for all of us. What we may need is a different type of development. It is a development that allows opportunity for everybody to fulfill their dream and live a full life, but at the same time have a sustainable impact on nature. So you do not see in the framework things like reducing the use of nutrients We know we're gonna need to use more nutrients. What we have is reducing the loss of nutrients to the nature, the part that is damaging, just as an example. Your second point on wildfire, you're absolutely right. In all things being equal elsewhere, wildfire is a good thing for ecosystem. That is a normal part of the. However, we are in a situation in many parts of the world where climate change introducing an enormous amount of wildfire, and some human activities are also introduced conditions that make those fires more often and with a bigger impact. What we're doing in the framework is defining the conditions of the ecosystem that make them resilient, and that includes wildfire. And then finally, 30 by 30 science, I will point you to a very, very good paper that we published under the website for this meeting under information document. I think it's information 5 that provide a scientific analysis on the various targets, and you'll get a lot of response there.
Yeah, I think the other bit of it in trying to really bring business to conformity with the conservation requirements is that this framework is, there is a target that is specifically going to deal with business, what they need to do in terms of doing their work, but also the dependencies that they have on biodiversity. So I think it will be the first time that we will be having a target that talks strictly to business. And we had people saying we shouldn't just make it voluntary for business, that we should, try to make sure that business actually reports on what they're doing. So it is for their own good that this will have to be done, not that because they're doing it for CBD. This is always the problem. When you're doing something, you think you are doing it because the CBD needs you to do it. It is not like that. If we are doing this for our own good, if biodiversity is not here, who will be on this planet? Eating what? Drinking what? But as it goes, we're also gone. Then the other one is that financial flows now, within the target, one of the targets, we're trying to make sure that the financial flows actually do incorporate biodiversity. So there are these sectors that could be supported by the banking sector or whatever. We should be able to see whether there are certain criteria that we could use to vet.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to start moving ahead here. So Stella, why don't you please ask your question? Do you have a microphone for Stella? Thanks. And then I'm going to have to take the question online because our panelists have got to get going.
Thank you. So very quick, 2 questions. One question for the co-chairs. The next question is for Madam Secretary. For the question for the co-chairs is that, can you tell us what's your brief, or how are you facilitating in defining ambition and measurability on gender? And the question for Madam Elizabeth is, is there a risk of having the entire COP, now that it has moved to Montreal, getting derailed by the Ukraine-Russia conflict? We saw an angry demonstration today in the opening ceremony, and if yes, then how is the CBD going to mitigate that possible derailment? Thank you.
Defining ambition and performance indicators is a tricky science, and we're learning that definitely there are areas that are easier than others, like doing conservation and protection of land. You can pretty easily find good metrics on doing that. On gender issues and participation of women and girls, there are metrics in terms of how we do that. So I don't have them in mind, but you can find indexes pretty easily in terms of that. We've done that for indigenous people, both at the global level and at national level in many countries. So I encourage you to have a look at the document that was prepared for this meeting on the indicators, and then under Target 21 you will find a suite of indicators. There will be a meeting immediately after this meeting in Bonn by specialists, and we've taken care of not only have biologists, but there will be people there that are coming from various backgrounds, including science, including business, etc., because we want that broader look at.
Yes, in addition to that, there is the Gender Action Plan, which of course is being discussed and will be part of this framework as well. Then there is a target, as Co-Chair said, that parties are seeing whether they could have a specific target on gender. So our targets this time round, all of them, are going to have indicators, as I said. So we should be doing better in terms of measuring what we are going to implement this time round in this framework than before. Because previously, what we did with the strategic plan for biodiversity 2020 was that we first adopted the targets, then spent almost 6 years trying to agree on indicators. By the time we agreed on indicators, we were stepping into developing the post-2020. So that lesson there came into our minds that we now need a number of things done together. There is the capacity building component, and technology transfer, there is the gender, there is the one on financial resources. All these things now are all being done together to make sure that the framework is better placed for implementation.
When there is war, and as we are planning for our meetings, it's difficult to say it will derail or not, but we all know what is happening between Russia and Ukraine has an impact globally, not just for biodiversity. And we hope that the meeting will still continue, whether or not the war will still continue until then. At least so far, all the meetings which had to happen this year, they've taken place. And we hope the same spirit will continue.
Great, okay, thank you. I'm just going to answer one more question that's from online, and this is again from Reuters, and I guess this is probably primarily for you, Executive Secretary. And the Reuters correspondent, Gloria Dickey, again, points out that in recent years, both Canada and China have had a chilly relationship, and now that they'll have to work closely together for COP15, she asks, is this a concern, or could such friction derail planning, given you've been talking with the countries we have conference on this?
We need to remember that the Conference of the Parties is not the Government of Canada conference. It is and it will be a United Nations conference, just the way we are here. And the moment the venue is handed over to the United Nations, it becomes the UN premises. And the government will normally provide security outside that premises. What is happening inside, the way we see ourselves here in Nairobi, is under the auspices of the United Nations, and the United Nations do provide that security. That clearly shows that this is an international meeting, as will be our Conference of the Parties, where all countries will be expected to be in and be discussing and negotiating. So this is the beauty of international cooperation and multilateralism, where national interests are put aside for purposes of the global issues. And this is how we see COP15 Part 2 will be.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to everyone who's in the room and those of you who joined us online. This press conference has now come to an end. Thank you very much to our panelists for taking the time from an exceedingly busy day. So I wish everyone a very good day and invite you to follow the proceedings of the conference for the next days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.